Okay, all right. First part, right?
Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist congregation of Monmouth County. My name is Nicole Kennelly. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I serve as a member of the worship committee, the aesthetics committee, and I lend my voice to some of our music groups here. Whoever you are, whomever you love, however you arrived at this beloved place, you are welcome here. Our mission is to create community, transform ourselves, and transform the world. I welcome to the pulpit Judy Stevens and Marinelle Mukherjee so they can tell you a little bit about some things going on in the congregation.
Good morning. I'm coming to you this morning on behalf of Council. Every month, Council likes to recognize people who do outstanding volunteer work in our congregation. And this month, it is a trio of people, which is why I opted to bring this up here, of Lois Blake, Irene Gibson, and Barbara Vallon. I believe Barbara is the only one of the three here this morning. But let me tell you a little bit about why Council chose to honor these three women. Lois Blake, Irene Gibson, and Barbara Vallon have all been volunteers for many different UUCMC programs, endeavors, and events, virtually since walking in our doors. Among their efforts have been organizing and presenting meals at the Bayshore Lunch Program, an organization that provides nutritious food, fellowship, and resources in a safe and caring environment to all in need in the Bayshore area. Lois, Irene, and Barbara have been engaged in the program for several years now. planning, purchasing the ingredients, and preparing weekly lunches and recruiting volunteers to assist in the work. Barbara notably has been doing this for more than years. It's more like decades. We want to acknowledge and thank them for their extraordinary dedication to supporting the mission of the Bayshore Lunch Program and living our stated summary mission statement, creating community, transforming ourselves, and transforming the world. Barbara, would you stand up, please, so the congregation can see you? Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Marinelle Mukherjee, and I am here to talk about a resurgence of something that happened long time ago in what I call the BCs before COVID, and that was soup luncheons. We used to have them regularly, and they were wonderful. People would linger after service and have good soup and maybe some bread and dessert and just visit with each other. It was a wonderful community building time. It was just simply lovely. And I used to organize them, and I'm doing it again. We are going to have a soup luncheon in 2 weeks. And many of you who are here are on my mailing list asking for volunteers to bring soup and perhaps dessert bread, help clean up, etc. I have several people who clean up. I have several soups, but I sure would like more. And if you look on the back of your service, kind of where my finger is, there's something about it with my name and my email. Email me. If you tell me here, I will probably remember, but if you email me, I will definitely get it down. Thank you, and I hope you can help.
This morning, we welcome a guest speaker, Reverend Anthony P. Johnson. Reverend Johnson is a Unitarian Universalist parish and community minister and an affiliated minister with the Community Church of New York. He has a history with UUCMC and looks forward to his return visit, and we look forward to your return visit as well. Thanks to the UUCMC Endowment for supporting today's service. I draw your attention to the backside of the orders of service for announcements and service information for each week. For those on the live stream, and for video viewers, the order of service link is available to you in the YouTube service description box. After the service, coffee will be served in the community room, and people of all ages are welcome to visit with one another. If you are new to us, please do visit our website, uucmc.org, where you can sign up to get all the latest news of the congregation by email. We look forward to getting to know you better. Please put your devices on silent as we enter into worship together. Welcome again to this place of love and hope.
Beneath all curious customs and beliefs, deeper than ecclesiastical creeds, more vital and basic than priestly rites, stands one impressive fact. Man and woman touch infinity. Our home is an immensity. We live, move, and have our being in an eternity. This magnificent assertion is our greatest affirmation. Those are the words of Clarence Russell Skinner, one of the great leaders of Universalism in the 20th century. And next we have chalice lighting. Chalice lighting? I believe it's the chalice lighting now. We gather this hour as a people of faith with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, and in celebration of the life we share together.
Good morning. Please rise in body or in spirit, and we'll sing together song number 1003 in your teal songbooks. It's called Where Do We Come From? This is a choose your own adventure song, but we'll sing through it all together to learn it first. So we'll sing through the top line twice, the next line twice, the next one twice, and then the final line twice, all together to learn the melody, and then we'll do it a few times, and you can choose whichever line you prefer to sing, right? And it all works beautifully together. Where do we come from? Where are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Thank you.
When I think about hope and heritage, and I close my eyes, the image that comes up for me is an image of a tree. When I think of heritage, I think of a tree and the roots that go down deep. And when I think of hope, I think of the seed. Our story today is one of possibility and hope. I invite you to imagine, if you will, holding a tiny seed in your hand. It's a simple thing, seemingly unremarkable, Yet within its small shell, it holds the potential for something extraordinary. What seeds do you hold? Your heritage, your dreams, your commitment to nurturing a future that embraces the values that we hold dear. Our story is about how, in the smallest of seeds, we find the potential for growth, transformation, and flourishing, where love, justice, and compassion reign supreme. This story is called If You Hold a Seed by L.A. McKay. If you hold a seed and make a wish and plant it in the ground, something magical can happen. And if there is some sun and some rain, it will begin to sprout. And if you wait and wait, you will see some little buds and tender leaves. When summer comes, there might be a bee, or perhaps a butterfly, and they will spread some magic. But when autumn comes, all its leaves will fall, and then you will have to wait through all the winter days until spring, when the tree will grow with buds of gold and green. Birds will come to perch. Perhaps they'll sing. The tree will soak in the summer sun and rain. Then, when autumn comes, it will lean into the wind. And if you wait and wait, season by season, year by year, the tree will grow so large it will hold you. And if you wait some more, one day, your wish, that thing you hope for, will come true. May it be so. Let us bless our children and youth as they go off to their faith development small groups with Go Now in Peace.
Every week in this congregation, we are provided with an opportunity to practice generosity. This is your invitation to contribute to the well-being of our congregation and to our neighbors through the good works of organizations which receive half of the monies collected each month. Our Share the Plate recipient for October is the Monmouth Center for World Religions and Ethical Thought, an adjunct organization started by members of UUCMC and others, and whose explicit focus has been peace building through interfaith dialogue. MCWRET provides ideas and materials to promote interfaith work, to expand interfaith skills, to deepen interfaith knowledge, and to promote the understanding of and acceptance of religious and cultural diversity, helping create a more peaceful world. For those of you present here in the meeting house, the plates will be passed by the ushers. You may also join this time of generosity via text, send your offering by mail, or charge your contribution online with a memo designating an amount to the Monmouth Center for World Religions and Ethical Thought. Please give generously.
Is this a tip plate? What's look at that? Just wondering, things change over time. And I haven't been here for a long time. But it's good to be here again, to take that exciting drive down the Parkway from Essex County and see this beautiful countryside that is Monmouth County. It's a beautiful part of the world. And every once in a while I think back fondly when I lived right down by the shore in Long Branch and could walk to the beach whenever I wanted to, which, being kind of coming from crazy old Swedish ancestry, would sometimes be in the dead of winter with the wind blowing and ice blowing through the air as rain froze while it was falling. Well, so it's good to be back. This was the site, this church was the site of my very first sermon in New Jersey way back in 1980. But not this room. This room hadn't been built yet. That room. And I had recently concluded a contract extension ministry in Burbank, California. I mean, who else gets to have a ministry in beautiful downtown Burbank? And I had been ordained by the Burbank Unitarian Fellowship, having moved there from Boston after completing my work at Harvard Divinity School. I had lived in Boston for a decade at that point, a decade that began with going there for college, and then continued with several years after college of working in a hospital and superintending apartment buildings. And then I started divinity school in 3 years, during which I continued to work in an apartment and superintend apartment buildings. Continued to work in a hospital and superintend apartment buildings. And I graduated in 1977, and then, having thought carefully about what to do next, jumped at the opportunity to move to a coast I'd never seen, and spent the first few years of ordained ministry in and around Los Angeles, starting with the Burbank Unitarian Fellowship. Now, after that contract extension ministry ran its course, I spent some time in Los Angeles working as an unpaid community organizer while I had a paying job at a hospital. All that time I lived in North Hollywood, which, if you're into LA geography, we can talk about that. And I lived in North Hollywood, and while I was living in North Hollywood, it reached a point where 2 weekends in a row, I flew back to pre-candidate for congregations in the Northeast. And one of those pre-candidate weekends, I had my sort of trial sermon here, and it was the first time I was here in this place. And that worked out, and I wound up in East Brunswick for a number of years after that excursion and adventure. Later on, during my first stint in community rather than parish ministry, which was in New York City, I still lived in New Jersey, and I attended this church in large part because of the excellent religious education program, which is something in our family that I took responsibility for our daughter. So she'd been here for many years, and that's part of her life. She now lives on the West Coast in Seattle. And I don't know what she does on Sunday mornings in Seattle, and I'm just as happy that I don't know. But she thrived and made friends in the program here. And I even taught a couple of sessions, I think. Well, this morning I speak to you of heritage and hope. Now, briefly, I'll introduce it because I have more to say about it as I go along. Heritage is where we come from and what we carry with us. Hope is about the future we would like to build and live. Heritage is manifested in experience which our ancestry, parentage, where we live, and whom we know make possible. Experiences, I should have said that plural. So, in a real sense, part of my personal heritage is every place I've lived since I was a little kid in the Bronx over 70 years ago. I identify as a first-generation American of Swedish and Italian ancestry, which, when I was young, people thought was an odd combination. And in the case of my parents, it definitely was. But they had a very good marriage, and all together had 5 children over 20 years. Now, my father was born in Sweden. And after several Atlantic crossings, as a member of a crew on an ocean liner, in his late teens, because he had lied about his age to get that job as a crewman on an ocean liner, he and his best friend, Harry Hansen, well, obviously they're both Swedish, they're from the same small town on the west coast of Sweden, they jumped ship and made a life in the United States. Or made lives. They remained friends the rest of their lives, but lived in different places. My mother was born in New York City of Italian parents. Her mother born here, and her father an immigrant from Italy. Now, this small amount of information about my parents is an indication of a complex heritage. Let's put it this way. You have an Italian, she is Catholic. You have a Swede, he's Lutheran. And they weren't too into it until it became something they could have disagreements about, which they did. And all of us wound up going to Sunday schools. There were a couple of different Sunday schools involved. And my brother, my younger sisters, my brother's older, my younger sisters and I, had kind of a complex heritage with multiple ethnicities, because my brother's not Italian, he's Norwegian, but he's also Swedish. The rest of us are Italian and Swedish. So the neighborhood, first the neighborhood in the Bronx, where we lived till I was about 5, and the neighborhood we later moved to in Connecticut were populated very much with recent immigrants, children of recent immigrants, and older U.S.-born citizens, some with, stronger ethnic identities and some with less. And the neighborhood we moved to in Connecticut, I experienced as more complex than even that in the Bronx, though that might have been just age. I mean, how often does a 3 or 4-year-old get out on the streets by himself? This one did not. But when we moved to Danbury, Connecticut, which is a very ethnically and religiously diverse community, has been for generations and generations, I had friends of my age who were of African American, Mexican, and Puerto Rican birth and ancestry, as well as various European ancestries, and birth in some cases. In the 1950s, when we were kids, there was a lot of immigration from Eastern Europe, particularly from Hungary. And among my friends growing up were either children of Hungarian immigrants, and some of whom had actually been born in Hungary themselves before the families immigrated to this country. Now, I was more fortunate than many other white members of my age, cohort, and generation, in that I did not grow up in a rigidly segregated neighborhood. There were a lot of rigidly segregated neighborhoods in those days. Mine was not one of them. There weren't enough people for that. It was a marginally rural / ex-urban / but they didn't use the term ex-urban in the 1950s. You could walk by a farm going to the school bus, and then 15 minutes later, get off the bus in an inner city school. It was an interesting growing up. Well, I didn't grow up in a rigidly segregated white neighborhood. There were some in our town, or one that was economically homogeneous. Now, my father and our two closest neighbors were Scandinavian immigrants and skilled workers and friends from New York City, where they'd met working in factories, who bought land together in Connecticut and subdivided it and built their homes there. And the other two closest families to us growing up were African American, and unlike us working class immigrants, solidly middle class. So there's a whole bunch of interesting mixed up sociology going on there, which I treasure to this day. But without going into a lot of those details, because they're not important, I want to quote words from Psalm 16, which ring true for me. The lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Yea, I have a goodly heritage. Heritage is where we come from and what we carry with us. And hope is about the future we would build and live. Heritage and hope. Heritage is manifested in experiences which our parentage and where and how we live or grew up and live now made and make possible. As I said, I identify as a first-generation American of Swedish and Italian descent. My father was born in Sweden, eventually settled in the United States after several cruises back and forth as a crewman on an ocean liner. My mother was born in New York City. Her father was an Italian immigrant, and her mother was also Italian, but first generation, born here. And again, complex heritage. So I guess I was really lucky because I had this kind of complicated family, and then there were cousins who appeared from various times, and the relationships weren't always entirely clear to us kids, except we were told they were our cousins, just like Gus and Molly next door were our aunt and uncle, and I eventually figured out they weren't related to us at all. But they were also Scandinavians, so they were our aunt and uncle. And as I said, I was luckier than some members of my generation that I did not grow up in a neighborhood completely or rigidly segregated by race or class. Heritage provides many of the building blocks of our lives, and indeed, heritage has a broader meaning than that of our families and us as individuals. For instance, we can point to an overarching heritage within our complex American culture that includes history, the variants of English that we speak in this country, arts that developed here, even if they had European roots, but developed differently. Heritage is one of the building blocks of our lives, and as I said, it has a broader meaning. But heritage is also specific and not merely generic. I had mentioned some of the specifics of mine, such as my own U.S. birth. Now, others are a little unusual. My Italian-Swedish ancestry is not unique, but it seemed so as we were growing up until we found out that the music teacher in our elementary school was also half Italian and half Swedish. His name was Richard Aronson. You see where the Richard came from and the Aronson came from. And one of my siblings, I should make clear, is not Italian-Swedish, he is Norwegian-Swedish. There were two different mothers involved. So my extended immigrant family and the circles of my parents' family were diverse. When you get over to the Italian side, you see all sorts of stuff that I can't even keep track of. But the Vietnam War, now we're getting to the heavy stuff. The Vietnam War is part of the heritage of my generation. And the anti-war movement is part of the heritage of a substantial part of my generation. And the civil rights movement is part of our heritage as well. Even if we were very young at the time the civil rights movement was happening, we knew what was going on. And if we lived in a racially integrated neighborhood as I did, we heard firsthand about what that meant to our African American peers. Now, you in this congregation are members of several different generations and grew up and lived in various social locations and times of different possibilities, different struggles, and different successes. I know there are long-term activists in this congregation. There are artists in this congregation. There are creative people. There are people who do quiet charity that they may not tell anyone else about. And this congregation itself has its charitable endeavors. And hope, too, is not generic, it is specific. While a person may have a generally hopeful attitude, and my experience includes both hope and discouragement in that regard, and in this I am not unique, but this is true of personal interests and situations for me, and also for the other things I get involved in. See, hope is the capacity to envision what might be possible in the future and seek to make it real. And for me, whether this is at the personal level or the social level, it is the vision and desire for a better future. Being a husband, parent, minister, and published writer are fulfillments of hopes and ambitions I had when I was much younger. There are broader and less individualistic hopes, and many of us who are religious liberals hold strong hopes for peace and greater justice in the world. Here in the United States, both heritage and hope are in part encouraged by widespread and nearly universal public education. I went from kindergarten through high school in the public schools of Danbury, Connecticut. Some of my friends attended private schools, whether private prep schools or religious schools. We had Catholic, Lutheran, and Episcopal schools in the town where I grew up, as well as the public schools. And many of my peers, though most of my peers and friends were in public schools, there was religious diversity among them as well. In fact, one of the few friends I remain in touch with from 7th grade is Jewish, and the other one is now a retired Congregationalist minister. He wouldn't be retired except for health issues, because he's exactly the same age I am, sort of mid-70s somewhere. Youngsters, mostly. Well, many of my peers and some of our parents expressed strong hopes for peace and justice through the anti-war movement and civil rights movements of the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. Many of our peers, my peers and some of our parents expressed strong support for the war in Southeast Asia. We had both in my family growing up. And family members who, rather than trying not to be drafted, went out and enlisted and volunteered for NAM. My brother served in Vietnam. My best friend's cousin and some of our high school classmates died in that war. Other friends and family have focused their energies on civil and human rights. And there has continued to be much work for stronger and more widespread civil rights. I mean, that was part of the atmosphere of our childhood and young adulthood, and many still continue at it. I continue to have hope for peace and justice. I continue to believe that part of the work of the religious community, a very important part of it, is to bring more peace and justice into the world. And I know this congregation well enough over many years to know that this is true of you as well. So I'm going to ask you to pause for a moment and just think for a moment. Identify one hope that is important to you, whether personal or social or historical, whatever. Hope, and identify it and reflect on it for a moment. You may want to reflect on that more later, or another hope, or think a bit about how much you've achieved of it and what you might do to achieve more. Well, I have one more story of hope. About 25 years ago, I traveled to Maui, where I was impressed, mightily impressed, by the famous banyan tree in the city of Lahaina. Banyans are not native to Hawaii. And if you're not familiar with the banyan tree, it starts out from one shoot, grows out, and as the branches spread out, it drops roots through the air to the ground. And once those roots implant themselves, some of them grow into secondary trunks. So a banyan tree can have many trunks. Now, for those of you who don't know this, and I didn't know this for a good part of my life, when you hear the story of the Buddha meditating under a tree, you keep looking around at our maple and oak trees and birch trees and say, how does he meditate under a tree? It was a banyan tree, which can cover a third of an acre or more. So I went to Maui, about 25 years ago. And this banyan tree is 150 years old and was planted by a British settler on the island. And it has 16 substantial trunks in addition to the main trunk. That's its original sprout. Now, you may recall there were big fires on Maui in August. A lot of Maui burned. A lot of the city of Lahaina burned, which is a place, I remember how beautiful that was. The banyan's leaves were charred and the trunks and branches scorched. But not very long after the fire, the tree showed signs of life. Little sprouts started. And arborists had already started giving it special care, heavily watering it, loosening the soil that had been packed down around it. And it has started developing more new leaves and starts of sprouting branches. Now, its recovery is not guaranteed, but the early signs are hopeful. And there are days when I look around and think that this whole earth of ours is battered and a bit charred at times. Certainly the air that blows by my house is pretty charred at times. In fact, we were smelling smoke just yesterday from some fire nearby. And we live in a dense urban neighborhood, so it's not like these are the woods off, in some park. This is somebody's house that's burning. But earth is battered and charred. People are battered. A lot of people are battered. And society unravels in part in various times and places. And we see those, whether it's at work, in our neighborhood, among family and friends. Read it in the newspaper. Well, if we are truly people of hope, and I like to think we are, hope is not a foolish optimism. Hope is a belief that better things are possible, and we can choose to create those things and make them happen, or at least try to make them happen. We won't always succeed, but we can try. Well, we know, if we are people of hope, that our heritage is one of caring for the earth, for people's lives, and for justice. We are nurtured and shaped by that heritage. It also has many other manifestations, but those are the ones I'm thinking about today. And living this hope, living this heritage into the future, that can be what gives us great hope and possibility and fuels us. And let us therefore live in hope and possibility, knowing that if we do so, it will matter and it will be better. Amen. Blessed be. Please join me in the spirit of prayer and meditation. Let us call upon the Spirit that moves above us, below us, around us, and through us. The Spirit of life, the Spirit of love, the Spirit of hope, the Spirit of justice. And let us call upon the ancestors who are of that Spirit, who led the way and modeled for us what life could be and what institutions like this church could be. Let us call upon that Spirit. Let us share that Spirit. Let it enliven ourselves by sharing that Spirit. For indeed, the Spirit we share is one of love, of hope, of comradeship, and the energy and commitment to serve each other, to serve this world, and make, as one of the old hymns says, this world fair. May it be so.
And now I invite you to rise in body or in spirit, and let's sing together. You could use your teal songbook, 1020, or you can follow along on the screens. Wonderful song about hope and uncertainty.
Amen.